I've always felt like I was cursed. My childhood is a blur of bad memories, forever tainted by the sound of footsteps that seem to echo my deepest fears. My parents' divorce was the catalyst for it all. The night they tore each other apart, I heard those footsteps, and my life was forever changed. Little did I know that sound would become a constant companion, a harbinger of darkness and prophecy that would one day define me. As a young child, I found myself caught in the middle of my parents' bitter battle. Each of them wanted me for themselves, and I was torn between the two people I loved most. In the end, I stayed with my mother, trying to make sense of the chaos that had erupted around me. For almost 3 years, I struggled to adapt to my new reality. And then, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were more intense, more menacing. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, but I couldn't understand what it meant. The next day, my mother passed away. The sound of the footsteps lingered in my mind, a haunting reminder of the tragedy that had befallen me. I never shared my experience with anyone, unsure of how to process the strange and terrifying events that had unfolded. After my mother's funeral, my grandmother took me in, providing a sense of stability and comfort in the midst of chaos. But the peace was short-lived. My father, determined to gain custody of me, took my grandmother to court. I was confused and scared, caught in the middle of yet another battle. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand, with my father's victory in court marking the beginning of a new and uncertain chapter in my life. Staying with my father proved to be a struggle. I had trouble sleeping, and my schoolwork began to suffer. Changing schools and friends every few years had taken its toll, making it hard for me to cope. My father tried to bridge the gap between us, but I had already isolated myself, feeling like a curse. I was a burden, a reminder of the pain and suffering that had ravaged our family. A few years passed, and the tension between my father and me continued to build. One night, we had a fierce argument about my poor school performance. My father was furious, and I could feel the weight of his anger bearing down on me. That night, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were heading towards my father's room. I felt a surge of adrenaline and rushed to see what was happening. I had no plan, no intention of defending myself, but I was tired of being haunted by the unknown. As I entered my father's room, I was met with a sight that would haunt me forever. A dark shadow loomed over my father's bed, its presence suffocating. I tried to scream, but my voice was frozen in my throat. The shadow seemed to be strangling my father, and I felt myself fading away, consumed by darkness. The next thing I knew, I was waking up to the sound of my father's lifeless body being discovered. He was gone, and I was left with more questions than answers. Why did this keep happening? Why was I surrounded by death and darkness? I felt like I had lived 1,000 lifetimes, and yet I was still just a boy. My grandmother took me in once again, but I wasn't myself anymore. I was at my lowest, tired of the pain and suffering that seemed to follow me everywhere. I knew that I couldn't keep going on like this, but I didn't know how to stop it. I felt like I was cursed, like I was a magnet for tragedy. My grandmother tried to comfort me, but I pushed her away. I couldn't talk about it, couldn't share my feelings with anyone. I preferred to be alone, lost in my own thoughts. But even in my solitude, I couldn't shake off the feeling of impending doom. I knew that my grandmother was next, that the footsteps would come for her too. I tried to warn her, to tell her about the sound that haunted me, but I couldn't find the words. I was trapped in my own nightmare, unable to wake up. And then it happened again. The footsteps came, and my grandmother passed away. This time I couldn't wake up. It was like I was paralyzed. The darkness closed in around me, and I was consumed by it. But somehow, I managed to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. I was 24 now, and I knew I had to take control of my own destiny. I was determined to leave my past behind and start anew. I had no family left, no one to turn to, but I was resolute. I would make a new life for myself, one free from the pain and suffering that had haunted me for so long. That's when I met him, a prophet who seemed to genuinely care about my well-being. He took me under his wing, offering me a place to stay and a sense of belonging. He lived with his wife, and they welcomed me into their home with open arms. The prophet would often say that I was a son sent by God, and he began to trust me with various ministry duties. I found myself drawn to his faith and his conviction, and I started to see the world in a different light. I began to believe that I wasn't cursed after all, that I had a purpose and a destiny to fulfill. As I worked alongside the prophet, I found a sense of peace and belonging that I had never known before. I was determined to make the most of this new chapter in my life, and I was grateful to the prophet and his wife for taking me in and showing me the love and care that I so desperately needed. For years, everything seemed so perfect. One Sunday, after the service, the prophet called me for a drive. In the car, he told me that it was time for me to do my own thing in the ministry. I saw it as a selfless gesture that would allow me to grow. But then he said that before I could start, I needed to activate my prophecy spirit. He told me that he would take me to a place where this could be done, and I felt a surge of excitement. This meant I would be like him, a true servant of God. After a long drive, we arrived at a small village. It was quiet, with an eerie stillness that made me feel uneasy. We stopped in front of a small house that seemed to be marked with Jesus crosses. I felt at ease as we entered, but my sense of calm was short-lived. Inside, the house seemed bigger than it had from the outside, but it was the symbols on the walls that caught my attention. They were devilish, and they seemed to be watching me. I was shocked, but the prophet just kept moving forward, leading me deeper into the heart of the house. We came to a stop in front of a man who was sitting in the middle of the room. The prophet knelt down, and I followed his lead. They began to speak in a foreign language that I couldn't understand. The man stood up and burned some herbs, and then the prophet told me to jump over the flames until they went out. I did as I was told, eager to please and to prove myself. But as I jumped, I started to feel dizzy. The flames seemed to be burning forever, and I stumbled and fell. I was still conscious, but I was disoriented. The man touched my forehead and said, "Receive the spirit of prophecy. Let it rule you as I rule." I think he said more, but I lost consciousness and fainted. When I woke up, I was back at the church. But something was different. I wasn't the same person anymore. The prophet kept me in charge of the next sermon, assuring me that I would see the power of God. He insisted that it be a secret. Indeed, on the next sermon, I was on another level. I could see a person's past, fears, and heart desires, and a voice would tell me how to pray on them, and they would empty their pockets during offerings. I went on to do my own thing, still maintaining a connection with the prophet. I performed wonders, and fame followed me to an international level. Money was abundant, and everything I could have ever wanted was mine for the taking. But then the prophet passed away, and his church was left in the hands of his wife. It was then that I realized the truth. This was a soul-selling business, and I was being used by the devil himself. The voice that guided me, the power that I possessed, it was all a lie. I had been deceived, and now I was trapped in a world of darkness and deceit. I feel a sense of desperation wash over me as I realize the true extent of the damage. The families of church members and the members themselves are dying, and I know that I am somehow responsible. I try to speak with the wife of the prophet, but she denies any involvement, leaving me feeling frustrated and helpless. I know that I have to stop this, but every time I try, I lose my sight. It's as if some dark force is holding me back, preventing me from taking action. And to make matters worse, I have also lost my ability to be intimate. My manhood is no longer active, leaving me feeling emasculated and powerless. But I know I have to try. I know that I am taking a risk, but I can't just stand by and watch as innocent people die. I am ready to face whatever lies ahead. The darkness closes in around me, but I stand tall, refusing to back down. I know that I might not make it out alive, but I am willing to take that risk. For the first time in my life, I feel truly alive. I am fighting for something that matters, something that is bigger than myself. And in this moment, I know that I have finally found my true purpose.